Chuck knew this was the best decision of his life. He noted that the remote golf course would need a lot of work, with it being overtaken by Mother Nature. But with great work comes great opportunity, as his old grandfather never said. He just finished moving into the old crooked gardener shack at the far edge of the course. Chuck took one last look onto his land as the sun was setting behind the dense forest that surrounded the property. He retreated into his abode for the night. As he fell asleep on his sleeping bag, he dreamed of the splendor of his future golf course. Chuck bolted upright. The sound of a small engine starting, though distant, broke through the quiet of the woods. Oh, it's probably just a neighbor mowing his lawn, Chuck noted. He crept back into his covers as he shut his eyes. Chuck's eyes opened furiously. A deafening droning sound shook the entire house. What on L? Chuck yelled. Chuck looked outside his window and saw a large airplane pulling up from its dive. Oh yeah, I forgot about the airport being a few miles from here. Chuck went back to sleep. Suddenly, a knock from the door. Who could it be at this time? Chuck got up from his bed and went downstairs to open the door. No one was there. Hello? Chuck asked the outdoors. Everything was dark, but the forest was dark. A figure jumped from the shadows as a loud whirring noise sounded. The person approached slowly, holding a bloody electric string trimmer. Could it be? Chuck backed away into the mansion nervously. The man was masked with a metal mesh face shield and wore tattered jeans and a faded neon green shirt caked in gore. The Weed Wacker Man! Chuck exclaimed. The man lifted the implement to Chuck's eye level and revved the electric motor. He then lunged at Chuck. Chuck ran upstairs into his bedroom. He grabbed his book that he had been reading and chucked it directly at the doorway. The book met the man in the face as he came around the corner. Chuck used this moment of confusion to go through the secret passage behind the painting in his room. He was running through cobwebs in a narrow hallway when the man burst through the painting behind him. Chuck dashed into his garage where he found an assortment of tools mounted on the walls. He quickly equipped a machete and prepared to defend himself. The man rounded the corner and stopped. He looked at the machete and pressed a button on his trimmer. The strings retracted and several sharp blades extended from the base with a sharp metallic scrape. Chuck realized he needed more power. He held his hand out and grabbed his pole chainsaw. The man smirked through his face shield. Finally, a worthy opponent, the man said as he adjusted his stance. Chuck and the Weed Wacker Man bowed and began to circle each other with narrowed eyes. The man revved his bladed trimmer and Chuck gave his saw more gas. After a couple of hours, the Weed Wacker Man made his move. He stabbed with his trimmer at Chuck's chest, but Chuck expertly dodged his attack. Chuck reacted and swept upwards with his saw. The man sidestepped and attempted to sweep Chuck's legs from underneath him. Chuck jumped and started to approach the man. He slashed and Chuck deflected the blow. He backpedaled into a wall and pressed against it. As Chuck stabbed forward with his saw to the man's head, he dropped and slid under Chuck. Chuck turned to meet his blow with his saw. The man hit Chuck's saw with such force that it fell from his hands. He kicked the saw behind him and pushed Chuck against the wall with the trimmer. He was trapped. Any last words? The man said triumphantly. Chuck looked with fear in his eyes at the man's disgusting weed trimmer. He laughed as he squeezed the trigger. Nothing happened. He turned the trimmer in his hands and found that the battery was dead. You know, Chuck stated coldly, you should have bought the gas-powered model. Chuck swung his machete upwards and knocked the man backwards. His face shield slid and clattered to the floor behind him.